Evaluate the expression for A equals -8, B equals 3, and C equals -6. So let's see what we're doing in these problems. In part A, we're going to be taking the opposite of A and we're going to multiply it by C. And notice we know it's multiplication because the A and the C are right next to each other. There's no other operation sign showing there. So this is another situation where we have what's called juxtaposition. Remember, we've talked about juxtaposition before. And when we see that juxtaposition, that things are right next to each other without any other operation, we know that that's going to be multiplication. So we're going to have to multiply. So let's see what we've got here. We're going to work with the idea of isolating our variables. So we want the A and the C to be in their own little areas. The A value that we've been given is -8. We want to be sure that we don't forget that negative sign that was out front, so we're going to put that negative there. And then our C value was -6, so let's substitute the -6 in there as well. Now notice how important those parentheses are. If I were to just write in the values of A and C without the parentheses, let's look at what it would look like. It would look like this. Here, and then we would have the -8 and the -6. And it would just be kind of this mess of negatives, and we'd have no idea what was going on there. So we want to be sure that we use the parentheses around the values that we have here. And so now when we look at this, we can say, well, I've got 1, 2, 3 negative signs going on. And so when I take a negative times a negative, and remember this is multiplication going on right here, negative times a negative is going to give me a positive. But then when I throw on this third negative sign here, that's going to end up giving me a negative answer. Okay? So we're going to have a negative. And now we can just go ahead and take care of the 8 times 6. 8 times 6 is 48. So my final answer would be -48. So that way we took care of the negative signs first, saying, well, a negative times a negative is a positive. And then when I take the opposite of a positive, it gives me back to a negative. Another way to work with this problem, if I rewrite it over here, there's my -8 and there's my -6, would be to say, well, the opposite of -8, opposite of -8 is +8. And when I take +8 times -6, notice we would still end up with -48. So there's a couple of different ways to think about these problems as we're working them through. For the second problem, again, we want to pay close attention to where our negative signs are. So there's my negative out front, and we have B over C. So let's put in our values. There's my negative sign that's coming down. Okay, and we're going to isolate our B and our C. There's the B and the C. So our value for B is 3, and our value for C is -6. Okay. Here the parentheses aren't quite as important because the 3 and the 6 are already separated from each other by this bar here. So that's going to help keep track of where my signs go and that kind of thing. So let's work to simplify this fraction part, but not forget that negative sign that's out front. Okay, so that negative sign we want to be sure we bring along. There's that negative. And when I look at this 3 and this -6, well, I know that that negative sign down in the bottom could just go ahead and come out front. And so I'd have 3 over 6. But 3 over 6, we're looking at that and we're saying, well, there's a common factor here. We could think about that common factor of 3. So 3 times 1 is 3, and 3 times 2 is 6. Those 3's are going to cancel out. So now I'm left with, if I come over here, the opposite of -1/2. Well, the opposite of -1/2 is just 1/2. So that would be my final answer for that one. And over here we saw -48 was our final answer for the first problem.